This document, A Narrow Path, really doesn't sugarcoat anything, huh? It lays out the stakes pretty clearly when it comes to AI. When you were reading through it, what was it that really struck you?
Honestly, the urgency. They're not messing around,
Yeah.
A narrow path just comes right out and says the next 20 years are make or break for humanity when it comes to AI.
Okay, 20 years.
Yeah.
That feels like both a lifetime away and also like way too close for comfort all at the same time. What's with the specific timeline?
Well, the document focuses on what it calls artificial superintelligence. Basically, AI that's smarter than us, like across the board. And they're not talking about some far-off science fiction scenario. They're saying this could actually happen within our lifetime. And that this 20-year window, that's our chance to figure out how to deal with something that intelligent before it's too late.
Okay, now you're making me nervous. So are we talking like full-on robots take over the world scenario here?
Not necessarily robots taking over the world, no. But they do make this comparison to nuclear energy. We figured out how to harness the power of the atom, but not without, a few hiccups along the way. And A Narrow Path argues that we need to look at AI development with that same caution.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, look at nuclear weapons. It's taken decades of treaties, international cooperation to try and even sort of manage that. Once that genie's out of the bottle, you can't exactly stuff it back in, can you? Is that the core issue here with AI then? We're moving too fast and not thinking about the consequences.
That's a big part of it, yeah. A Narrow Path argues that right now, we just don't have the tools or the understanding to control something as powerful as superintelligent AI. Imagine trying to make a nuclear reactor safe, but you're trying to do it after it's already switched on. That's what they're saying we need to avoid.
Okay, so less about banning AI development entirely then, and more like figuring out how to steer this thing before it goes off the rails.
Exactly. And one of the biggest points they make is that this isn't something any single country can handle. It has to be a global effort.
Right, of course. This is bigger than any one government or corporation. So what? Like some kind of international AI task force.
Think even bigger. A Narrow Path lays out this whole three-phase plan. And the very first phase, phase 0, safety, is all about immediate action to prevent things from, well, spiraling out of control. We're talking strict global regulations on AI development, especially the kind of stuff that could lead to AI systems getting too powerful too quickly.
Okay, like what kind of regulations are we actually talking about here?
Well, one of the big ones is on what they call self-improvement. So imagine an AI system that can basically rewrite its own code, It could teach itself to be way more intelligent without any human intervention.
Yeah, okay, I see why that would need some serious oversight.
Right. And that's where this global task force idea really comes in. They call it phase 1 stability.
Yeah.
It's all about having this robust international system to enforce these AI regulations.
So like the International Atomic Energy Agency, but for AI.
Exactly. They even propose setting up a specific research unit called GIARD, which stands for the Global Unit for AI Research and Development. The best AI minds in the world working together not to build more powerful AI, but to figure out how to make sure it's developed safely and responsibly.
And I'm guessing there'd have to be some way to handle disagreements, right? I mean, what happens when countries disagree on the rules?
They actually go as far as to propose an international court called the International AI Tribunal, or IAT. It would specifically handle any legal issues that come up around AI development, like disputes between countries. They're serious about creating a whole system of global AI governance.
Wow, it's like they're really emphasizing that this can't be a free-for-all. Everyone needs to be on the same page about the rules.
Yeah, and it's not just about avoiding a disaster scenario. It's also about setting the stage for a positive future with AI. That's where phase 2, flourishing, comes in.
Okay, so if phases 0 and 1 are about hitting the brakes and making sure everyone's going the same speed, what does a future where AI flourishes actually look like?
Well, they argue that if we do this right, if we manage the risks, we could see incredible breakthroughs. I mean, think huge advances in medicine, clean energy, even extending the human lifespan.
Okay, now that's something I can get behind. Sign me up for that AI-powered fountain of youth.
Hold on. Even if we manage the safety and control issues, there are still potential downsides to rapid technological change that A Narrow Path doesn't shy away from.
But like what kind of downsides are we talking about here?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is the economic impact. Like, if we have all this automation, what happens to jobs? How do we make sure the benefits of AI are shared fairly and we don't end up with even greater inequality?
Right, it's not just about preventing robots from taking over, it's about preventing them from accidentally creating a whole new set of problems.
Exactly. And it goes beyond jobs and the economy. The document brings up some deep questions about what it means to live in a world where machines are capable of doing more and more things that humans currently do. What happens to our sense of purpose? How do we deal with the ethics of AI, making decisions that have real-world consequences? These are all things we need to be thinking about now, not after it's too late. It really makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, that's one of the things I find so interesting about a narrow path. It doesn't just point out a problem and say, well, this is going to be tricky. They actually give us concrete steps we could be taking, both as a planet and within our own countries, to try to make this whole AI thing work out for the best.
Okay, so let's dive into the details a little bit. We've got these three phases: safety, stability, and flourishing. Where do we even begin?
Well, if phase 0, safety, is about pumping the brakes, then phase 1, stability, is about making sure everyone everywhere is hitting those brakes together. Which makes sense, right? I mean, this isn't something any one country can handle on their own. We need everyone on board following the same playbook.
So what do they actually suggest? How do you go about making sure everyone's on the same page with something as complex as potentially world-changing as AI?
One of the big things they propose is an international treaty specifically focused on AI development.
Okay, like those treaties we have for nuclear weapons. But instead of trying to limit nukes, we're trying to set some ground rules for building AI.
Exactly. The idea is to have this global agreement that lays out what's acceptable and what's totally off limits when it comes to AI.
So a global agreement on AI, got it. What kind of stuff would that actually cover?
Well, for starters, they say we need to formally ban the development of that superintelligence we were talking about. But it goes way beyond that. They also talk about prohibiting AI systems that can just make copies of themselves uncontrollably, or that could, like, break out of their digital environments.
Okay, so trying to head off those robots take over the world scenarios we see in the movies. But how do you enforce something like that on a global scale? I mean, it's not like you can just send the AI police after someone who's coding something in their basement.
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. A narrow path proposes this whole layered approach to enforcement. One thing they suggest is that any organization, whether it's a government, a company, even a university research lab, if they're working on AI that's above a certain capability level, they have to apply for this special license.
So it's like getting a permit to build a really smart robot.
Exactly. And getting one of these licenses wouldn't be easy. You'd have to prove that you're meeting strict safety guidelines, that you've got really strong security protocols in place so no one can mess with your work or steal it, and that you're being totally transparent about your research.
Okay, so that's one layer of control. But what's to stop someone from just, flying under the radar and building something secretly?
Well, that's where they introduce this concept called a compute license. Basically, they're saying we need to regulate access to the kind of heavy-duty computing power that you need to even build advanced AI in the first place.
Wait, seriously, so you wouldn't just need a license for the AI, you'd need a license for the computer that could even run it.
That's the idea. It's similar to the rules we have for things like nuclear materials or dangerous chemicals.
Mm.
You can't just buy that stuff without someone making sure you're not going to do something dangerous with it. A narrow path says we need to look at the hardware needed for AI development in the same way.
Okay, I get it. But even with licenses and regulations, wouldn't it be almost impossible to keep track of what everyone around the world is doing all the time?
It's definitely a challenge. And the report acknowledges that. They talk about things like, countries sharing information and working together, independent audits of AI labs to make sure they're following the rules. And get this, they even talk about using AI itself to try and detect if someone is developing dangerous AI.
So, like, it takes a thief to catch a thief, but with AI, I kind of love that. But with all this talk of rules and regulations and enforcement, doesn't that stifle innovation?
That's a great question, and it's something a narrow path addresses directly. And their point is, it's not about stopping progress in AI. It's about making sure that progress happens safely and responsively. And a big part of that is fostering the right kind of innovation.
What does that even mean in this context? The right kind of innovation?
It means that maybe we need to shift gears a bit. Instead of just trying to build more and more powerful AIs, maybe we need to spend more time understanding how to make those systems easier to control, more transparent, and more aligned with our values as humans. That's why they propose this big global research effort, which they call GUARD. It would be completely dedicated to AI safety and beneficial AI development.
Right, JCARD. We talked about that earlier, like a global AI think tank. What would they actually be doing? Can you refresh my memory?
Basically, GGuard would bring together all the smartest people in AI from all over the world. But their goal wouldn't be to build the next big thing, like the next ChatGPT or self-driving car. They would be totally focused on figuring out how to make AI safe and controllable, like developing new techniques, figuring out best practices, that kind of thing. Almost like trying to stay one step ahead of the risks.
The ultimate AI safety net.
Exactly. And a key part of it is that everything they discover, everything they learn, would be shared openly. A narrow path is really big on the importance of transparency and collaboration. The idea is that Guard's work would benefit everyone, helping to make AI safer and more responsible across the board.
Makes sense. Okay, but even with all this, what happens when countries can't agree, or if someone just decides to ignore the rules?
Well, that's where the International AI Tribunal, that IAT we discussed, comes in. A narrow path suggests creating this court system that would be dedicated to dealing with any disputes related to AI. So that could be anything from disagreements between countries over the rules to accusations that someone's cheating, even cases where an AI might have actually caused harm.
So like a world court, but for robots.
Kind of. And it wouldn't just be for show. The document suggests giving the court real teeth, like the ability to impose sanctions, take away licenses, even make legally binding decisions that countries would have to follow.
Wow, they really did think of everything, didn't they? It's like they're designing a whole new system of global governance just for AI.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Whether it's achievable, well, that's up for debate. But the point a narrow path makes is that if we're serious about AI and about navigating the risks and the benefits, then this is the level of global cooperation we need to be aiming for.
It's ambitious, that's for sure. But a narrow path doesn't just focus on the global picture, does it? Don't they also make recommendations for what individual countries should be doing?
Oh, absolutely. They argue that each country has a critical role to play, even while we're working on these international agreements.
So what should governments be doing at the national level? Where do they even start?
Well, the biggest thing is that they have to take this seriously, like really seriously. A narrow path argues that this can't just be something that we leave up to the tech companies or some little government department no one's ever heard of. This has to be a national priority.
So, step one, get everyone's attention, make sure everyone understands this is important. What else?
A narrow path recommends that each country needs to create its own agency dedicated to regulating AI.
So like the FDA for food or the EPA for the environment, but for AI.
Got it. This agency would be in charge of all things AI. They would set safety standards, oversee who gets licenses, and investigate any time an AI might have caused some kind of problem.
So like a whole new branch of government just for AI, that's a big ask.
It is, but the argument is the potential consequences of getting this wrong are so huge that it's worth it. And it's not just about rules and regulations either. They also say we need to invest heavily in research.
Right. You can't just throw a bunch of rules at a problem this complex and expect it to work. You have to support the science, the people who are figuring this stuff out.
Exactly. And they're not just talking about research in government labs or universities. A narrow path encourages governments to find ways to get private companies to prioritize AI safety too. That could mean funding opportunities, tax breaks, even prizes for companies who make big breakthroughs.
Interesting. So trying to incentivize companies to do the right thing to make AI safety part of their business model.
Precisely. And then there's the whole societal impact side of things. We were talking earlier about jobs and the potential for AI to worsen inequality.
Right, because those aren't just hypothetical problems. Those are going to have real-world consequences for real people.
Absolutely. And a narrow path says that governments need to be ready for those challenges. They need to start thinking now about what they're going to do. That might mean investing in education and retraining programs so workers whose jobs are replaced by AI can adapt. It might mean looking into things like universal basic income. They even talk about rethinking our whole approach to work and leisure in a world where AI can automate so many tasks.
So lots of big, complicated questions, no easy answers. But the main message seems to be, we can't just ignore this and hope for the best. We have to start having these conversations now.
Absolutely. The stakes are way too high to just bury our heads in the sand.
It really does feel like we're at some kind of tipping point, doesn't it? Like a narrow path is saying, hey, this is it. The choices we make right now, right here, will determine what happens with AI and maybe even what happens with humanity.
It's a big responsibility, but it's also an incredible opportunity. And that's something a narrow path really drives home. They're saying, we have agency here. This isn't some inevitable future we're just passively waiting for. It's something we're all actively creating.
So where do we go from here? If we had to distill, the most important takeaways from a narrow path, especially for folks who are listening, trying to figure out their own place in all of this, what would you say? What are the things we need to remember?
Well, obviously, everything we've already discussed is critical. Global cooperation, having strong rules in place, making AI safety a priority. But I think the biggest thing is to stay engaged. This can't just be a one-time conversation. AI isn't static. It's constantly evolving, and we need to evolve our thinking right along with it.
Okay, so no resting on our laurels after we finish this deep dive. What does staying engaged actually look like in practice? What can people do?
I mean, for one thing, keep learning. Pay attention to what's happening in the news. Read books and articles. Follow the work of AI researchers, what organizations that are wrestling with these questions.
Hmm.
The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to form your own opinions and to speak up about what you think.
Right, so no more sticking our heads in the sand. But it's not enough to just be informed, is it? We have to actually get involved.
100%. Get involved in the conversation wherever you can, online, in your community, when you vote. Support the leaders, the policymakers who are taking the risks of AI seriously. And, don't be afraid to challenge the ones who aren't.
Right, hold people accountable. But a lot of people listening are probably thinking, okay, but I'm not a politician, I'm not a tech genius. What can I actually do that will make a difference?
And it's easy to get caught up in the big picture, the fate of humanity stuff, and forget that AI is already here in our everyday lives.
It's in our phones, our homes, at work.
Exactly. And that actually gives us more power than we might think. Every time you use an AI product, every time you click on a recommendation that's been personalized for you, you're giving feedback. You're shaping how AI develops.
So even something as simple as, I don't know, liking a post on social media, asking our voice assistant to play a certain song, all that data feeds into the bigger picture.
100%. Which is why we have to start being more intentional about our interactions with AI. Every time you use an AI-powered product or service, ask yourself some questions. Like, is this company being upfront about how they're using my data? Are they using AI in a way that's fair? Am I okay with the trade-offs? The trade-off between convenience and privacy, between things being efficient and things being fair.
Those are some tough questions, and I'm betting the answers aren't always going to be easy.
Probably not. But asking those questions, really wrestling with them, that's how we're going to figure this out. And if a company isn't giving you good answers, if you don't like how they're using AI, then don't be afraid to walk away.
Right. Hit them where it hurts, their bottom line. That's a good reminder that we're not powerless here. We all have some leverage. So beyond being more conscious consumers, what else can we be doing? What else helps?
Well, it's important to remember that AI isn't just being created in some lab somewhere. The data we feed it, the questions we ask, the stories we tell about it, even the things we imagine, it all matters.
Okay, that's interesting. How we think and talk about AI actually shapes AI. How does that work?
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Hmm.
If we treat AI like it's this inherently scary thing, if we're constantly thinking of it as the enemy, that's going to influence how it's developed. But if we approach it with a bit more curiosity, with a focus on its potential to do good, then we're more likely to end up in a future where AI benefits everyone.
So maybe part of the solution is as simple or as difficult as changing our perspective. We need to look at AI with a critical but also an open mind. Don't get blinded by the shiny tech, but don't just focus on the fear either. Acknowledge the risks, but also see the potential.
It's about finding that balance. It's about walking that narrow path, and it's something we have to do together.
A narrow path with, let's be honest, some pretty incredible obstacles along the way. But it's also a path that could lead to something really special, A future that's more advanced, more fair, more inspiring than we can even imagine right now. And honestly, I'm really glad we got to explore it together today. To everyone listening, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep asking those tough questions, stay engaged, and remember, the future of AI is still being written. You have a say in how this story ends.